Happy holidays again, everyone! I'm ready to make my next countdown. Normally I talk about calming winter settings or the songs that play in them, but this time I'm going to be doing something different. This is a list of my top 10 favorite ice bosses. Here, this countdown only has one rule aside from the usual. Just because the setting is ice themed doesn't mean it qualifies. It has to actually have enough ice related elements to it. So with that said, let's get started. Rayman Revolutions was a pretty good game, at least when compared to the first Rayman, though I wish I had gotten the original version, Great Escape, because it would be better if the game that made me appreciate this franchise more didn't have annoying sound effect glitches and an overworld that's near impossible to navigate. However, there is one plus side to me choosing this over Great Escape. If I bought Great Escape, I wouldn't have faced the ever-amazing Golem 13. You face this boss while in constant usage of the super helicopter ability. How do you beat Golem? You need to wait for him to shoot thunderclouds at you, and then you have to punch the clouds to knock them back at him, until the clouds above him get darker and darker until they finally strike him, causing damage. It's not every day where you're required to use the power of the weather to defeat your opponents. Now, I know I technically said that being in an ice area isn't enough for it to qualify as an ice boss, but combined with the fact that some of his main methods of attacking are shooting ice, I think it probably counts. Though probably more of a thunder boss, but still counts for this list. I don't know what it is about groups of villains that have different personalities, but there's something about them that I like, and the Mage Sisters from Kirby Planet Robobot are no different. We have Flamebirch, the fire user, Zan Partizan, who specializes in electricity, and Francesca, whose weapon of choice is ice. And since this is a list of ice bosses, it's obvious that I'm talking about her. You fight all three of the sisters twice in this whole game, including her. The first fight with her is good since she gives you a first good impression of the sisters, since she's the first one you fight, but the fight with her on Blizno Moon is what I'm talking about, since the background is lovely, and she puts up a better fight this time. But now that I got that out of the way, let's talk about the fight itself. It may seem like a generic everyday ice boss until you realize that she wields a giant ice axe. How can you go wrong with that? She also has some pretty great looking attacks, one where she traps you inside that axe. Trapping moves are annoying, but as far as they go, this one at least looks awesome. Another of her attacks is where she sprays a soda gun that bounces off the ceiling and floor, and changes direction in a way I don't see very often in boss battles. Her fighting style is pretty awesome, and she is probably one of the best bosses in the game. Lorelei is not only the first ever Elite Four member in the Kanto games, but the first Elite Four member in the series, and she leaves a pretty good first impression. Unlike the other Elite Four members who only have 3 Pokemon of their respective types, mainly due to the limited amount of Pokemon back then, Lorelei has 4. But my favorite fight with her is the rematch on Fire Red and Leaf Green. Not only was this the original Elite Four member, but there is even a bit more meaning to this fight. After the time you saw each other at Icefall Cave, she seemed like a cool character there, so this feels more like an inspiring fight. This also introduced us to an awesome new idea of having Elite Four rematches with stronger Pokemon, some that weren't in the original Pokédex. I don't know who thought this was such a crime that it needed to be removed from the newer games. And even the ones that do have changes to their team are mostly just higher leveled versions of the original team. That's it, no new Pokemon. But even this left a little bit to be desired. Like maybe they could have given her a Hoenn Pokemon like Warren or Glalie. Still, great battle. Answer me this. How many times do you get to face a snowman in a snowball fight? I mean, snowmen throwing snowballs is nothing unique. I mean, look at Mr. Blizzard from Super Mario 64. But this time, both you and the enemy are throwing snowballs at each other. The fight also plays a lot different from the usual Donkey Kong Country game formula. Most of the time, you're in a side-scroller. But this time, instead of being a side-scroller, you throw your attacks into the screen as your enemy ducks behind mounds of snow trying to dodge your attacks. That's pretty incredible for a Super Nintendo game. I mean, it may not be the first time it's been used in a Super Nintendo game. After all, this one was pretty much released at the end of the system's lifespan, but I'm proud of them for managing this. Eventually, Bleak will use his hat as a cannon and shoot snowballs out of it. Where does Railroad come up with these cool ideas? I guess if there is any problem with it, it's that the background can be a little glitchy at times. Well, that, and there are better ice bosses I've seen. But even with that knowledge, this boss is still a nice breath of fresh air among most Donkey Kong Country bosses. I was kind of debating if Ozzy counts as a boss or not, since the fight with him is over really quickly, but people said I'm allowed to include him, so here we go. This boss, as previously mentioned, is a very short fight. Heck, you can beat him in under a minute. For this fight, he encases himself in an ice barrier. However, despite that, all you have to do is hit these 4 switches in order to activate a trapdoor to drop him through. But that makes this actually kind of fun. I don't know what to say. It's probably the whole different target thing that I enjoy about this fight. It makes it rather unique among other bosses in the game. If there is anything wrong with it, it's the underwhelming difficulty. Not only does it go down really quickly, but it's nearly impossible to die against it. Unless you attack him directly and trigger his counterattacks, there's no way he can hurt you. But the way this boss is presented, I barely even care. If you've been in the community for over half a decade, you'll probably remember someone talking about Crash 3's fight with Dingodile a lot. I can't remember who it was probably Black Mage Maverick, but I wouldn't know since he unlisted all of his older videos because they were holding him back. I don't get it. But whoever it is, I can't really get mad at him for praising this boss, since it is pretty awesome. Seriously, you fight a boss that is surrounded by ice crystals, and he tries to kill you, inadvertently leaving openings for you to attack. Smart move, bring a flamethrower to a fight where you're defending yourself with ice. But the way you have to wait for enough openings in order to get a chance to attack him makes this an instant classic. Some bosses from the original trilogy are really good for their time, and this is a great example of this. While I can't say I blame anyone for hating the downgrade in Sticker Star's tone when compared to the previous Paper Mario games, I dare you to tell me that the fight against Mr. Blizzard doesn't look awesome. After an epic minecart ride, you find yourself face to face with an absolutely gigantic version of Bowser. This is probably one of the biggest bosses in the entire Paper Mario series, without question. The only other ones I can think of that are good candidates are Hooktail and Fractail. As you keep fighting this boss, it'll get smaller and smaller, giving a sense of progression, until you realize that this boss was a shiny Mr. Blizzard enemy controlling a robot. Yeah, if there's one complaint I have about this fight, it's that it throws that cliche at us where a big and intimidating guy turns out to be not so intimidating. This cliche was at least 73 years old by this point, but at least the giant robot part was still a threat, and helped contribute to this cool boss. Okay, sorry people. What better way to top off the best ice dungeon in the Zelda series than with the best ice boss in the series? Okay, that's not saying a lot because not that many Zelda bosses would make my list, but Yeto wants to give you the mirror shard that she and her husband Yeto promised you, but right when we finally reach it, suddenly the mirror shard corrupts her mind and turns her into a monster. And wow, this introduction is pretty horrifying. This is how you do Mood Whiplash the right way, because unlike a certain Mario Party minigame, this one doesn't feel like a cheap jump scare, out of place, and most importantly because it doesn't feel like they're actively trying to be mean. So Yetta turns into this giant monster named Blizzetta, and now you have to use the ball and chain. This, as well as the other main weapons found in this set of 4 dungeons at this point of the game, is one of the only times you're required to use this item, which is a major problem with Twilight Princess, but at least now this fight is more special. As you keep hitting her, she'll get smaller and smaller, but also gain spikes. In the second phase of the battle, she takes on another form, and you have to dodge Blizzetta's icicles, but you do so by looking at the reflection on the floor. She'll even try to surround you with them. After you win, Yetta will return to normal and you get a pretty heartwarming scene, if not somewhat cheesy, but still heartwarming. Great way to end off this epic battle. You know how back in May I stated that Samus hasn't had many friends and the closest she's had to friends were Rundus, Gandrita, and Gore? Rundus was probably the best one to Samus, and when we had to fight him, it was the most painful. But unfortunately, I already knew that we were going to have to fight him even before I knew that he was one of Samus's friends. First, let me mention the boss theme. It's a great theme, even though a lot of people call it overrated. Maybe it's a little overrated, but still a great song. During this battle, Rundus will create giant ice chunks in the battle to make this more interesting, and he will use ice rails to fly around. In order to beat him, you have to tear off his armor and then attack him. And you know how you have a hyper mode in this game? Well, Rundus has one too. He will swing around a gigantic ice chunk and try to hit you with it. After you win, we have to watch as the closest Samus has to a friend is killed right in front of her, which is definitely really heartbreaking. Though if I'm gonna be honest with you, I feel this part could have been stronger, for 2 reasons. The first one is that I feel we could have spent more time with Samus' friends before we had to fight them. The other thing is that I wish Samus was the one who had killed Rundus, because it would have felt more intense. But even putting that aside, I love this fight. This was not an easy choice. I thought about what I think are the best ice bosses I've faced, and none of them screamed instant number 1. Kingdom Hearts is an undeniably great source of bosses, and this is one of the best in the first game. One thing I like about the giant bosses you fight in the Olympus Coliseum is how, as opposed to the small area where you fight enemies, you have the entire room to be able to go to. You can even walk on the seats when fighting him. And when I said giant bosses, I wasn't kidding. Look at this thing. I mean, I'd expect no less from one of the Titans, but come on. This guy can shoot barrages of icicles that you can reflect back at him by using the guard command. That's always satisfying, especially when you reflect enough at him, he'll be temporarily stunned, allowing you to wail away at him. He'll also make the boss fight feel more suspenseful by causing ice to spawn from right under you, shooting ice in many different directions at once, and rain balls of ice on you. And he will freeze part of the arena, making this the closest we have to an ice level in this game. Once again, it was a hard choice of what should be number 1, and I can't really justify my position of this boss at the top, but whatever the reason, this is my favorite ice boss in video games.